Every time you wear a certain shirt to work, something goes wrong. Maybe it's that blue one, or maybe it's the hoodie that you wore during that one sprint review where everyone hated your designs. But now you just don't wear it anymore. Or maybe it's the opposite. You had a breakthrough insight in a particular coffee shop once, so now you go back to that same coffee shop every time you need to think. Now, we laugh at this stuff as silly superstition, right? But that same wiring that connects our unlucky shirt to a bad day is also connecting dots in our team meetings, in our retrospectives, in the way we evaluate people's performance, and the way our team makes product decisions. And when it's not a shirt, when it's a person or a process or a feature, nobody is laughing. If any of this sounds familiar, stick around because this week we're digging into illusory correlation. That's the bias that turns coincidence into conviction and makes your brain see patterns that aren't actually there. What's up, UX fam? Welcome to another edition of the Cognition Catalog, where every week or so we'll dig into a new cognitive bias and explore how that bias can impact how our team works together and what we can do to ensure we don't get caught up in the pitfalls. Because working with people is hard, and the more insight we have into the human condition, make it just a little bit easier. To learn more about illusory correlation, you can find more resources at cognitioncatalog.com. Sign up for the newsletter to get a new bias in your inbox every week, and make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to worry about falling for any of these cognitive biases again. And if you think you're getting something out of the show, then I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And shout out to this week's sponsor, Mobbin. If your team is tired of reinventing the wheel every time a new project kicks off, Mobbin gives you access to over 600,000 beautifully designed UI screens and user flows, all searchable with AI. It's the kind of tool that makes the whole team faster, not just you. Visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro and see why more design teams are making it a company-wide staple in 2026. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all their support. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So there was a stretch in a previous role where I was convinced one of our engineering leads did not like my design team. And it started small, we'd share design specs and he'd push back. We'd share research findings, he'd push back. We'd share a prototype that we thought knocked it out the park, he'd push back. And we get constant grilling about edge cases, whether or not we had considered every possible error state. He had concerns about feasibility. He always wanted to revisit decisions that we thought were locked down weeks ago. And at first, I tried to assume positive intent, but eventually I snapped and I started to craft this whole story around how much he didn't like me or my team. A story about how he was resistant to design or how he didn't trust the design team, how he thought UX was just a total waste of time. And then something weird happened. We were in a retro and our PM praised him for how thorough he was, how he caught things that nobody else caught, how he asked hard questions of everybody, not just the design team. He grilled stakeholders on business metrics when the rationale felt thin. He pushed back on product requirements that hadn't been fully thought through. He challenged engineering estimates when the scope didn't add up. Not only did he question everyone else, he questioned his own team's assumptions out loud in the room without hesitation. He wasn't singling the design team out. That was just how he operated. He wasn't resistant to design. He was just rigorous about everything. But I'd connected two things that happened to show up together: his skepticism and my team's work. And my brain decided that they were linked. I saw friction and my brain needed a reason for it, so my brain invented a reason. And that's what illusory correlation does. And you see this everywhere once you start to look for it. A designer hears one furious research participant and walks away thinking users hate this. A product manager watches one launch succeed after a marketing push and decides that marketing drives adoption. Never mind the 4 launches where that didn't work. The sales team swears that a difficult client is always difficult, forgetting every smooth call in between. Now, some of these patterns are real, but a lot of them are just a few memorable moments wearing the costume of a trend. And the tricky thing is that once this belief is in place, it kind of runs itself. The pattern gets stronger in our heads while staying exactly as make-believe as it started. So what is the illusory correlation? Well, we tend to see relationships between things that aren't actually related. When 2 events happen close together once or twice, our brains quietly file them away as connected, even when the link is pure coincidence. We then start expecting that connection to keep showing up, and sure enough, we notice the hits but ignore the misses. The term illusory correlation was coined by psychologist Loren J. Chapman in 1967, but the concept itself is easier to understand than the complex and hard to pronounce name suggests. Chapman noticed something strange happening inside clinical psychology. Trained professionals were reporting connections between patients' behavior on projective tests and their diagnosis. Projective tests are things like Rorschach and inkblot tests. Now, these were connections that statistically didn't actually exist. In one of the most cited early experiments, Chapman and his wife and colleague John Chapman asked clinical psychologists to review drawings made by patients as part of a draw a person test. Some clinicians reported seeing a strong link between patients who drew people with large eyes and those diagnosed with paranoia. And when the researchers analyzed the actual data, no link existed. The clinicians had completely invented the pattern. Now, what explains that? Well, two things mostly. First, our brains are wired to notice what's unusual. When something rare or distinctive happens at the same time as something else rare or distinctive, it feels significance. It's as if there must be a reason for it. This is sometimes called the distinctiveness effect. That co-occurrence grabs our attention in ways that hundreds of unremarkable pairings never would. Second, we tend to remember the hits and forget the misses. Once we form a belief that two things are connected, we unconsciously start cataloging the moments that confirm it. But all those times that didn't fit, we conveniently let those times slip by. In 1976, David Hamilton and Robert Gifford took this research a step further. They ran a series of experiments showing participants descriptions of behaviors attributed to two fictional groups. One group was a larger set, and the other group was a smaller set. Now, the ratio of positive to negative behaviors was identical across both groups, but because negative behaviors were rare overall, and the smaller group was already less common, participants consistently overestimated how often the smaller group behaved negatively. The two rare things got mentally linked, even though the data showed no actual difference. Now, this is worth taking a second to think about. Hamilton and Gifford did not find that the bias was driven by prejudice or conscious intention. Instead, it came from the way human memory processes frequency and importance. Rare things get stored differently because they feel more important. And then when two rare things show up together, the brain files those away as connected. The famous duo Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work in the 1970s on cognitive heuristics added another interesting layer here. Their research on the availability heuristic, and that's the idea that we judge probability based on how easily examples come to mind, it helps explain why illusory correlations stick. The co-occurrence that felt notable is the one that we can recall most easily, which makes it seem more common and more meaningful than it really is. And the result is a human brain that's constantly connecting dots, even when those dots belong to completely different pictures. Now, illusory correlation is the bias most likely to send product teams in the wrong direction without anybody even noticing. And that's because it can feel like insight. It can sound like signal, but it's almost always built on a handful of vivid cases plus the human brain's urge to connect the two. Now, start with how teams read their own metrics. A feature ships on Monday, weekly active users tick up on Wednesday, and by Thursday, the team starts referring to the launch as a win. But marketing ran a campaign on Tuesday, maybe a competitor's website was down on Wednesday, and traffic always lifts midweek. Now, the launch is the most available explanation, so it gets the credit. Future roadmap arguments now lean on a casual claim that the data never supported to begin with. A/B testing makes the problem mechanical. Ron Kohavi, who ran experimentation at Microsoft and Amazon and basically wrote the book on A/B testing, has found that roughly 1 in 4 quote-unquote statistically significant winners at big tech companies fails to replicate. Teams who peak early or run underpowered tests or try too many variants without correction, they will see patterns that are pure noise. That dashboard of data looks convincing because of the clustering illusion. That's random data's tendency to clump together in ways that look meaningful. And if you want to go deeper on that one, we've got a whole episode on it. But the short version is that clustering looks identical to real signal until you actually check the math. Illusory correlation also distorts how teams think about people. 3 angry support tickets from healthcare customers, and suddenly enterprise healthcare is a tough segment, becomes received wisdom. There's countless other satisfied healthcare customers that don't generate tickets, so they don't enter the team's mental sample. And that's Hamilton Gifford's findings in production. Rare group plus rare event encoded with too much weight, hardening into a stereotype that drives prioritization. A user research gets the same treatment. 6 interviews with power users, 2 of them mention a keyboard shortcut, and a persona narrative crystallizes. And from there, every quote that fits the story gets remembered. Quotes that contradict it slip out of the synthesis deck entirely, and nobody ever hears about it. The Chapman showed that this happens even when the underlying pairings are random, so it will definitely happen when the sample size is only 6. Engineering teams build their own folk correlations too. The Tuesday curse, the intern who broke prod, the exec demo that always triggers an outage. 2 distinct events occur concurrently. The team encodes a vivid memory, and superstition becomes a working assumption that shapes deploy schedules, code review intensity, and how junior engineers get treated. The team dynamic damage compounds. Decisions feel data-driven because someone can name a specific anecdote. Disagreement gets framed as not paying attention to what's obvious. Quiet skeptics who ask for the base rate get labeled as obstructionists. The team loses calibration without losing confidence, which is the worst possible combination they could have. This doesn't mean that we just need more data. It means we need better contingency thinking. Asking questions like, how often does the outcome happen when the suspected cause is absent? How often does the suspected cause happen with no outcome at all? Without that habit, teams will keep mistaking pattern recognition for understanding. The fix here is not to distrust every observation. It's to ask a boring but powerful question before acting on a perceived pattern. And that is, how often did the thing happen without the other thing? And that's the data point illusory correlation conveniently forgets. So what do we actually do about it? Well, here are a few places that you can start. First, count the misses, not just the hits. Illusory correlation survives because we remember the times 2 things happened together and we quietly forget the times that they didn't. When you catch yourself believing X always leads to Y, go looking for the counterexamples on purpose. How many times did the Friday deploy go fine? How often did the difficult client cooperate? The pattern usually shrinks fast once you account for the cases that didn't make it into your memory because they weren't dramatic enough to stick. Next, be suspicious of vivid evidence. The more distinctive a moment is, the more weight your brain gives it, regardless of how representative it actually was. One furious customer, one spectacular outage, one heroic save. These linger because they stand out, not because they're typical. So before you let a memorable event define a person, a tool, or a strategy, ask whether you're reacting to a real trend or just the thing that was easiest to remember. Distinctive is not the same as common. Next, watch how reputations get built. People who are newer or quieter or less visible tend to get tagged with those rare mistakes more than the people who are constantly around. The distinctive combination of unfamiliar person plus noticeable error forms a stronger false link than the same error from a familiar face. Now, when you hear a confident claim about how someone always does something, check whether it's based on an actual pattern or just 1 or 2 sticky moments that happen to involve the wrong person at the wrong time. Next, treat team superstition as hypothesis, not fact. Every team accumulates beliefs about what causes what. Some are real, many are illusory correlations dressed up as wisdom. The healthy move is to write the belief down and actually check it. Pull the deploy data. Count the times that thing happened. Look at the launch numbers. If the pattern holds, great. Now you know. If it doesn't, you just freed your team from making decisions around a coincidence that everybody treated as settled truth. And then lastly, make compared to what? A normal question. The single most useful habit against illusory correlation is asking for the base rate. How often does this happen overall? Not just in the cases that you remember. When somebody says a feature is failing or an approach never works, that's your cue to ask what the full picture looks like, including the unremarkable cases that nobody bothered to mention. It feels pedantic in the moment, I know, and it's hard to do, but it's also the difference between responding to reality and responding to whatever was most memorable. So where does that leave us? Well, hopefully you're not left thinking, don't trust your instincts. Your pattern spotting brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, and most days, that's a great thing. The small shift is just learning to pause on the patterns that feel the most obvious, because those are often the ones built from a couple of loud moments and a lot of convenient forgetting. The next time somebody on your team says that always happens, treat it more like a question instead of a fact. Does it really always happen? Pull the data. Count the not obvious cases. See if the trend survives after you've looked at the actual numbers. Sometimes it will, but a lot of the time you'll find that the pattern was never really there to begin with. It was always just a story your brain kept telling because the other times were too boring to remember. Well, all right, y'all, that's it for the Cognition Catalog for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on the illusory correlation and how we can avoid some of those pitfalls at work. But I'm curious, have you run into illusory correlation at work before? How did it impact your team? I'd love to hear about it. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. To learn more about illusory correlation, you can find more resources at cognitioncatalog.com. Sign up for the newsletter to get a new bias in your inbox every week. And make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to worry about falling for any of these cognitive biases again. And if you think you're getting something out of the show, then I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you want to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some select biases, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/shop. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the promo code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. And if you have a favorite bias that you want to see in print, let me know. I'd be happy to take requests. And if your team is tired of reinventing the wheel every time a new project kicks off, Mobbin gives you access to over 600,000 beautifully designed UI screens and user flows, all searchable with AI. It's the kind of tool that makes the whole team faster. So visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro and see why more design teams are making it a company-wide staple in 2026. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyondUXdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, Zoe, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those archives right now for as little as $5 a month. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.